Music theory with OneNote. Mirror inverse intervals versus negative scale degree intervals. Get ready and some coffee, because although we're just playing with OneNote, it's a beautiful note. Not required to, but if you have access to it and would like to follow along, we're currently in the OneNote file of Modal Node System, MNS Presentation 1227, OneNote Mirror Inverse Intervals versus Negative Scale Degree Intervals. List of presentations thus far over here. We plan on adding plenty more to them shortly, however. Also note, in this OneNote presentation, we could spend all of our time practicing the music theory side of things, but we also have another similarly numbered and named presentation where we build these tables in Excel, practicing Excel skills, music skills, and visualizing of table skills all at the same time. We're going to be continuing on with our discussion of intervals now, but we're going to look at the directionality, which is a problem. And therefore, we want to first think about the concept of what we want to keep in mind, how we want to visualize the fretboard, what is our objective, and how can we think about the tools given to us, naming conventions being the tools, imperfect tools as they are, to give us what we need to map out the territory of the fretboard. So the best way to visualize the fretboard is as a territory, as a map of the territory, similar to the globe. We have destination continent locations on it, 7 of them, like the continents on the globe. And we have 5 non-destination locations, which are going to be like the oceans. We go through them to get to the destination locations. Our head is above the fretboard in space, basically. It's above this low or heavy E string, the one closest to the ceiling. And we note that the fretboard like spins around in a circle. It spins, and we're going to give it 12 degrees of rotation, typically working on the 4th degree of rotation, which we call the collection of notes that are derived from the C majors, right? Now, although we're working in that collection of notes all the time, remember that if I shifted that forward to C sharp, to D sharp, the whole thing would shift forward just like the planet spinning around. And therefore, once I know my collection of notes, I no longer want to define them by the note names, but rather by the permanent continent names, the things that don't change relative to the position or viewpoint that we're taking. Nashville number system basically does that. If you're familiar with that, that's basically a node-based system giving a number to the nodes or the modes. 1 being the Ionian, the 4 being the Lydian, the 3 being the Phrygian, the 6 being the Aeolian, and so on and so forth. Now, the naming conventions that we have based on scale degrees cause us problems trying to pull us out of the optimal way to visualize the fretboard. That's what we have to work with, and so that's what we have to be careful of. So remember that if we have our continents on a globe, I could get from North America to Asia multiple different ways. I can go around this way, or I can go across the middle. But our system is even easier than that because it's like a racetrack. It's like a block. It's all in a circle. That means that all I need in order to define what is happening distance-wise is to give me the distance term, which we have 2 different ways to do. Either we have continent to continent, which is going to be the node to node, right? Or we have continent and ocean. The oceans are in between them sometimes, which would be like note to note. But we also have directionality because I could go backwards. So that's the problem. I have to take that into account because the current system really names things as though we're like on a NASCAR system. I think they only go clockwise, right? We only go one way. You can't go the other way or else all the cars will hit you. But when you're looking at this system, there's only one person driving the track, so we could theoretically go backwards or counterclockwise. Now, we also have an issue of, although the same pitch happens, or as we go around, you're in the same key, it also goes up an octave and down an octave. We'll introduce that problem later, but just from a general interval standpoint, we're going to think about it as going around in a circle, now introducing the idea that we could go negative around in the circle. Now, we touched on that last time, but last time we basically mainly just thought for the naming convention that we usually have with the inverse distance. So let me show you what the problem here is. If I'm on the 5 here and I want to go to let's say the 2, how do I get to the 2? Well, I could count clockwise by going 1, 2, 3, 4. It's 4 continents up, which are equivalent to modal half steps up. Or if I make that the 1, the scale degree term, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, this would be the 5th scale degree if I make that the 1. If I add the notes, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it would be 7 continent and ocean, which are equivalent to the notes up. What if I want to get from this 2 back to the 5? Well, we could retrace our steps, which means we're going in the negative direction. Note-wise, that would be negative 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? Negative 7 backwards. Or continent-wise, it would be negative 1, 2, 3, 4 modal half steps backwards, which you would think from a scale degree would be from this point, that would be the 1, negative 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the negative 5th scale degree. Now, some people do use negative scale degrees, but most people don't. Most people wouldn't know what you're talking about if you say it's a negative 5th scale degree. That's the problem. So really the only thing we have is going forward. I have to keep going forward around the block, which means it would be 1, 2, 3 modal half steps forward to get back to here. Or if I make that the 1, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4. So if I'm measuring from this point, I really have to call it something that's related to a 4th scale degree, even though really I'm thinking about it going backwards this way, which means it should be a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 negative 5th scale degree. So that's the problem. We could choose either of those methods, but we need some method to take into account directionality. So let's do our same kind of idea that we looked at last time. If I'm going from this Mixolydian and then I'm going to this C here, let's color them here. I'm going to go from here to here. How do I do that? Well, the distance I can see is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 notes. That would be equivalent to continents and the oceans, right? If I look at just the continents, counting from this point, it would be 1, 2, 3 continents up, or 3 nodes or modes up, third modal half step, which would be the 4th scale degree if I make this to 1. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4th scale degree, so we could name then that a 5 note away perfect 4th is what we typically call it. Now, what if I measure from here going back to here? Notice again, we don't really have a name for that, but you would think that if I make this the 1, it would be a negative scale degree. It would be 1 and then negative 2, 3, 4, right? It would be a negative 4th. It would be a negative 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 note away, negative 4th. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, negative 4th. But again, if you say a scale degree going negative, people don't really know what you're talking about. So you almost have to just kind of drop the idea of a negative scale degree. It doesn't really make sense as well, because you can't really take like 7 minus the scale degree to see the other side, the other direction. In other words, if I was on like this 2 and I go up 1, 2, 3, if I go 3 up, then I could figure out how long it would go to the inverse direction by saying there's 7 steps minus 3. So if I went 3 up and then I wanted to get to the same point going the other way, it would be 7 minus 3, which would be 4, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, going the other direction. But if I make that the 1 from a scale degree, 1, 2, 3, 4, now this is the 4th, 7 minus 4 doesn't get me what I need to go the other direction around. I also don't have an easy way to apply out this concept of the naming conventions with the major, minor, and perfects, right? If I say this is going in the negative direction, 1, 2, 3, 4th, the negative 4th scale degree, is it a major, a minor, or a perfect? I'd have to kind of figure out what it was going forward to figure out the name convention of it going backwards. So from a practical standpoint, then, instead of using negative scale degrees, we end up having to basically count the number backwards. What I would recommend is say, I could see this going this distance forward would be 7, 5, 6, 7, 7 note away, perfect fifth. But I'm also going to say that the perfect fifth could also be a negative 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I could say a negative 5 note away, perfect fifth. That's a way for me to still just use a perfect fifth, because the perfect fifth then always gets me to from a C to a G, or from an Ionian to a Mixolydian. But I can also give myself directionality. Am I going forward 7, 7 note away, perfect fifth, or am I going backwards 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, negative 5 note away, perfect fifth. That also gives you the ability to go above an octave. So what if I'm going 7 plus 12, an octave up? Well, I think the easiest way to identify that is to say I'm going a 7 plus an octave, or 7 plus 12, perfect fifth up, right? So I think the idea of introducing the actual steps you're taking is the best way to do it. And then all you can do is just memorize the negative number of steps and realize that when I'm saying it's a perfect fifth, that fifth doesn't help me at all to go into the reverse direction, because I can't take 7 minus 5 to see the other side around the block, because the fifth is based on a scale degree when it should be based on a distance term. All right, so that's going to be the general idea. So let's look at this again, and we're going to say, all right, if I went one step forwards, then what would be the negative step would be a negative 11 steps would be backwards, would be 12 minus 11. So I can either get, if I'm going around the block, I can get to the same spot going one step forward, or go 11 steps the other way. Now notice this is similar to the concept we used before, which was the inverse distance. The inverse distance, a lot of times people think about it as though they're similar concepts in nature, the way we have to use them. But the inverse, typically, if I'm thinking of going from here to here, I'm thinking the inverse is going from here to here, meaning I'm measuring from this point, or I'm measuring from this point. But also, you kind of have to use that inverse concept if you're going from here backwards up to like this C, because I have to count the distance, 5, 6, 7, and then kind of take the inverse. You might think about that more like the mirror inverse, or something like that. So these are going to be kind of related terms. Again, they get messy because we don't have a real ability to deal with directionality. So, all right. So we're going to say, what would that be then? Now, if we think about this 0 as the 0 point, that would be the perfect first. Normally, I go forward, one step forward to get a one note away minor second. But I could start from here and one step backwards, or in essence, counterclockwise. If I went backwards, what am I going to call that? Well, I can call it a negative 1, because that's going to be the notes that I'm going to say is backwards. But then I'm going to keep the naming convention. Instead of calling it a negative second scale degree. Again, some people use that term, but I would think the better term to call it would be the directionality term, as though you were going forward. How do you get that? You have to say, okay, well, negative 1 minus 12 would be 11. So if I was going forward around the block, it would be 11 steps, which would be a major 7. So that means I would call it a negative 1 note away major 7. And the inverse of that would then be an 11 note away major 7. So the bottom line is, I'm thinking that the major 7 could be either 11 steps going forward or 1 step going backwards, right? So if I'm on this C, if I'm on like this C, I could go backwards. Let's grab this bit. I could go backwards 1, or I could go forward 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So I would name it 11 note away major 7, or a negative 1 major 7. And that'll allow you the distance. Now, of course, later we'll talk about the better term, which would be using this term, which would be a negative 1 note away from the Ionian node, which would be a negative 1 modal half step, which you would think would be the negative second scale degree. But notice we don't have a negative second scale degree. You could use them, but nobody really does that I've seen, right? So you have to call it a major 7. This would make more sense, because then you can see the inverse easily. because 12 minus 1 would be 11, an 11 node away, and then 7 minus 1 would be a 6 modal half step forward, an 11 node away from the Ionian node, 6 modal half step forward. So you can see this one makes sense. You can't do it over here because the scale degrees mess you up, so you completely lose the scale degrees when you go upwards. All right, so let's go to the next one. If I went 2 forward, that would be like 10 back. So what if I went 2 back? I should be opening up the bottom bit here, right? So what if I start on this 0 and I go 2 negative or counterclockwise? That would be kind of like the mirror distance of 11 or 12, right? So in other words, if I went 2 backwards, let's do it down here. Where is that going to put me? That would be like going 12 minus 2, which would be 10 forward, and I have to know that 10 forward would be a minor 7. Now the minor 7 is going to land me in the ocean if I went from the Aeolian mode. So I mean from the Ionian mode. So let's do it from the Aeolian mode and say we're on this Aeolian. So we're going to say, all right, we're here, boom, and we're going to go 2 backwards, which would bring me to here. So I'm going from here back to here. So what am I going to call that? Well, normally it would be going forward. So I have to say, well, then 12 minus 2 would be 10. So normally I would be going forward 10, like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 to here. So I could say it would be a 10 node away minor 7, which if I go backwards, I would then call it a negative 2 node away minor 7. Now, right? So that's going to be the idea of that, and that's the general idea. So negative 2 node away minor 7. All right, let's do the next one. Let's go up to this one and say we're going to go backwards 3. So we're going backwards 3. So if I go back 3, then what would it be if I went forwards? It would be 12 minus 3, which would be forward 9. So a 9 is something that would be in the Ionian mode. It wouldn't land me in the ocean from the Ionian. So let's go to the Ionian here and say that we go back 3. So let's go 1, 2, 3 would get me to this Aeolian. So I'm going back 3. Now that would be equivalent to going up 9, meaning there's 5 notes between these two. So 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I could go up to this A, right? So what would I call that? If I'm going from here back to here, I would call that a negative 3 note away major 6. So I'm using the same major 6 as though we're going forward. The 6 is basically meaningless in terms of going backwards, but I'd rather call it a major 6 rather than a negative 1, like if this was scale degree 1, 2, 3. I could call it a third scale degree, right? But no one really does that. So that's why I would add the directionality of the notes. It's negative 3 notes, but still call it a major 6, which will still give you the flavor as though you're kind of going forward. Now, again, the better way to do that is to use this term. Say it's an IA modal range, which would be a negative 3 Ionian negative second modal half step, which would be a negative 3rd scale degree, but we don't have negative 3rd scale degrees. Why would this make sense? Because obviously if you went the other way, it would be 12 minus 3, which would be 9, and this second number would be 7 minus 2, which would be 5. So you'd have a 9 node away Ionian 5th. So you see how that makes perfect sense, but you can't really do that with the scale degrees because of the scale degrees, so you kind of get messed up going backwards. All right, so let's do the next one. Let's say we go up and say we're going back 4 now. So if I go back 4, I'm going to say, what is that? Well, if I go back 4 notes, it's going to be if I went forward, it would be 12 minus 4 or 8. If I went 8 forward, I call that a minor 6. That's going to be a distance of a minor 6. So let's look at it here. If I went down here and say, all right, that's going to be having to go from a minor node. So now we're going back 4. So we're going from here, 1, 2, 3, 4 to here. So normally I don't say negative. I'd have to say, what would it be going forward? It would be going forward 8. So 5, 6, 7, 8 also gets me to a Lydian down here. But I'm going backwards. So I would say that the minor 6 then, I want to memorize that going backwards, it would be a negative 4 minor 6. So it's a positive 8 minor 6 or a negative 4 minor 6. When I go backwards, the 6 is basically meaningless because you would think it would be a negative 1, 2, 3, a negative third scale degree, which you could use. But again, I don't think a lot of people do. So I would think the best thing to do is just to memorize that a minor 6 could be a negative 4 distance or a positive 8 distance. And the 6 doesn't help you at all to go negative. That just hangs on there. Now again, I'll get to the Aeolian later. So we'll see that distance and I'll compare these distances in next time. Let's keep going here though. I'm going to say, let's go back to this and go up to the next one. So that would be like this one went up 4. So now let's say we go negative 5, perfect fifth. So if I went 5 notes back, so let's say we're on the C and we go 5 notes back. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That lands me on a continent. What would I call it? Well, I can't call it a negative 5 usually. I'd have to say the inverse would be 12 minus 5, which would be 7 notes away. And so I'd normally call that, if I went 5, 6, 7 up to here, a perfect fifth. So then I would just have to memorize, well, a perfect fifth could be 7 notes forward or it could be negative 5 notes. And again, the perfect fifth drops off. You would think the perfect fifth would be 1, 2, 3, 4, the negative 4th scale degree. But we don't have that, right? Now, if we use this term, a modal range, if an IX modal range, a 1, 5 modal range, the distance would be a negative because I'm going from here to here. I can identify the distance negative 5 note away from the Ionian node, negative 3rd modal half step, which would be a negative 4th scale degree. We don't have a 4 here, right? And that would make sense because I can then see the inverse. I can see the forward distance going clockwise by taking 12 minus 5, which would be 7. And I can see that the 7 minus 3 would be 4. So I'd have a 7 note away Ionian fourth would be the forward distance. This makes symmetrical sense. We have to come up with some workaround to use the current tools that we have. All right, so then I'm going to say, all right, and let's do the next one. We go back 6. So this is the weird one because the 6 is right in the middle, whether we go forwards or backwards. So if I go back 6, notice I can't go back 6 from anything normally that will fit in it, except I believe the Locrian. So if I was on the crazy Locrian and I go back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, we're good. So I'm going to go from here to back to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, back to here. Okay, let's look at it there. So what would that be then? Well, I have to say going forward, it would also be 6 because 12 minus 6 is 6. And we usually call that a diminished fifth, right? A 6 note away diminished fifth, but it could be an augmented fourth sometimes. That's going to be the crazy weird one. So all right, so that's going to be that one. And so I would just remember then though, that I can go negative diminished fifth or flat 5, a negative flat 5, right? And again, you would think it would be in the negative direction, 1, 2, 3, 4, negative 4th scale degree. But we don't use scale degrees. So you ended up having to say, oh, I'm just going to call it a flat 5, I guess, but it's going to be a negative 6 flat 5. If I went 6 forward, it would be 5, 6 right there, going this direction. All right, so let's go to the next one. So this was negative 6. Let's go up to the next one, and we're going to say, all right, what if we go negative 7 backwards? Well, what's the inverse of negative 7? It's going to be 12 minus 7 is 5. So if I went 7 back, we could take that back from the C. So let's go C. And I'm going to go back 7. Do I have enough room? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Takes me back to here. Okay, so that's going to be the negative 7 distance. So what will I call that? Normally, we would call it a 12 minus 7 or 5 note away, which I know is a perfect fourth. So it would be 1 or 5 down here, 6, 7 would be going this way, which would be called a perfect fourth. Wait, is that right? Yeah. But now I'm going backwards. So if I'm going backwards, I would say the 5 note away perfect fourth could either be a 5 note away perfect fourth or a negative 5 note away perfect fourth. Now you would think it would be what it would be if that's the 1, first scale degree, 2, 3, 4, 5, the negative 5th scale degree. But we don't use negative 5th scale degree, so I'm going to keep it with the perfect fourth, giving me the flavor, but then just memorize that it could be a negative distance, right? I could be going in the negative direction. All right, so then let's do the next one. We're going to say this is going to be if I go 8 back, let's go 8 back. What would I call 8 going back? I'd have to say, well, 12 minus 8 would be 4 forward, right? So I'd first think about this one, most likely. It would be a 4 note away major third. And then I'd have to think, okay, the major third means I could go back 8 as well, which would be a negative 8 major third. So if I went 8 back, let's do this. We'll take this and say, let's get rid of this here, and let's say I'm going 8 back. So if I was on this C, it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, which would get me to here. Now, so normally we would say 8 back could be 4 forward, which would be 5 forward here and then back, or 1, 2, 3, 4 right there. So I could go 4 forward, or I could go 8 backwards. So you would think it would be, if that was the 1, it would be 1, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, negative 6th scale degree. But we don't usually do that. We usually say it's going to be going forward. So I would just still call it a major third, but say it's a negative 8 note away major third. Now, it would be better if I called it something like an IP modal range, a 1-3 modal range, because then I can see it either way. Either an IP modal range means I can go counterclockwise, negative 8 from the Ionian node, which would be a negative 5th modal half step, which would be a negative 6th scale degree if we had 6 scale degrees going backwards, and the inverse, or the opposite or clockwise direction, would be 12 minus 8, which would be a 4 note away, and 7 minus 2 would be a second modal half step going forward. So it would be a 4 note away Ionian second. This makes sense. You can easily see clockwise and counterclockwise distance-wise. Right? All right, so then we're going to say, all right, let's do the next one. Let's get rid of this, and this, and this. And say we now are going to go 9, negative 9. Let's first think about it. If I went negative 9 backwards, I would say, all right, well, 12 minus 9 is 3. So what would 3, 4? That usually be called a minor third, right? 3 note minor third. We can bring this up, 3 note and 9 minor third. Okay. So then so that means the minor third will also apply to 9 backwards. So I would call it then a 9 note away minor third. So let's do that from like an Aeolian, maybe. Let's do this Aeolian and go 9 back. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 would bring me to this C. Now, normally, if I went 9 back, it would be equivalent to going 3 forward, right? So I can't really go forward from that A, but if I went 3 forward from this A, it would be 1, 2, 3 to get to that C, right? So I can think of it, you would think if I went backwards, it would be a scale degree. That would be the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It would be the negative 6th scale degree. But we don't have negative scale degrees typically. So what are we going to have to do? We're going to have to say it's a negative 9 and a major third. So I'm just going to memorize that the major third could go negative, could go in the counterclockwise direction 9 steps as the workaround, so I can have directionality even though it's not perfect. All right, and then if I go back to the next one, if I go back 10, If I go back 10, what am I going to call it? Well, if I went forward 12 minus 10, it would be 2 forward. We call that a 2 note away major second. Therefore, that major second could go 2 forward, or it could go also 10 backwards. So I'm going to call it then a negative 10 note away major, hopefully I said that, major second, right? Negative 10 note away major second. So in other words, if I was down here on like, let's say this C, well, wait a sec. I'm going to delete that. Let me delete that. Delete that. I'm on like, I need to be out here on like this C. Could I go back 10? 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, just barely. So I go back 10 from that C. Okay. But normally it would be going 2 forward. So I could go 2 forward to get to a D this way. So it would be a 2 note away major second, but I'm going back 10. So I'm also going to call negative 10 major second, right? You would think it would be called, this is the scale degree 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You would think it would be the negative 7th scale degree. But then you'd have to call it like, is it a negative major second, or it would be a negative 7th major second, right? You see how that gets messy because then I have to apply the major. If I use this term, it would be a modal distance of an ID, a 1, 2 modal range, and I can then apply directionality. Negative 10 from the Ionian node is the negative 6th scale degree, right? And which would be the negative 6th modal half step, which would be the negative 7th scale degree. By the way, I'm not putting another negative here because I'm imagining this negative follows through. And that would be easy to see the other way because 12 minus 10 is 2, and 7 minus 6 would be 1. So it would be a 2 note away Ionian first modal half step, which would be the second scale degree. So the scale degrees only work going clockwise is our problem. And then if I went, let's do this last one. If I went 11 backwards, what would I call that? Well, 12 minus 11 would be 1 going forward, which we would call a 1 note away minor second. So that means that minor second could also mean going backwards 11. So I would call it a negative 11 minor second. So in other words, if I started on this Aeolian, let me get rid of this. The minor second isn't in the minor scale, so we'd have to be on like the Phrygian scale or something like that. So let's say we're on Phrygian way out here. We go back 11. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. It would bring me to here, right? So that would be 11 back. So normally it would be going forward by 1. You can't see it here, but if I was on this one, I went forward to 1. You could see that distance there. And so you would think going backwards, it would be, if this was the 1 scale degree, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You would think it would be the negative 7 scale degree, but we don't have that. So I would just use the same term and say, okay, we're going to say it's going to be a negative 11 minor second. So notice this minor second often, particularly on the guitar, will be used whether you're going forward or whether you're going backwards, and it will be used for different octaves as I go around the block multiple times, octaves up. So the way to include, I think the best way to include differentiation to know if you're going forwards or backwards or if you've gone past an octave is to include in your naming construction the distance taken. I either went negative 11 minor second, or I went positive 1 minor second. And then if I go over an octave forward, I can say it's a 1 plus 12 minor second, or a 13 note away minor second. And that'll help you clarify exactly what you're talking about. So we have over here, I can add the mirror inverse into our list column wise. So if I went 1 forward, I can think of the mirror distance as 11 backwards, or the inverse distance, which I'm imagining from the other location. In other words, oftentimes if I'm thinking this way, I'm going if I go from this G, let's go to this G again, to this C, then I'm thinking I'm going forward this way, right? And then the inverse I'm thinking is going from here backwards. And then I'm also thinking like the mirror inverse, which means how many backward steps would I have to take to get back to this same spot. So they look similar, but we're trying to clarify the different directionalities we can go. So that means that it can be a 1 note away minor second will have a mirror inverse. I can go 1 step forward, or I can go negative 11 steps backwards. The second term, again, loses its meaning when I go backwards because it no longer is the second scale degree. It's going to be a negative scale degree, but I'm not going to worry about the negative direction. I'm going to add the idea of notes to help me. So if I go 2 steps forward, it's a 2 note away major second. What if I go backwards? Well, it's 10 steps if I go counterclockwise, but I'm still going to call it a major second. I'm not going to count negative scale degrees. So if I go forward 3 steps, then it would be 9 steps counterclockwise to get to the same spot. We call that a 3 note away major third going clockwise. Counterclockwise, I'm going to call a 9 note away major third because I don't want to think about negative scale degrees because they don't make sense going negative, and minor third, and the third still gives me the flavor. So if I go 4 forward, then I could go, if I go 4 clockwise, I could go 8 counterclockwise. We would call 4 forward 4 note away major third. Therefore, I'm going to say going counterclockwise, it would be a negative 8 note away major third. Positive 4 note away major third or negative 8 note away major third. The third not giving me any context going negative other than to know the flavor of a major third. If I go 5 forward clockwise, I can go 7 counterclockwise around the block to get to the same spot. We call that a 5 note away perfect fourth going forward. So the other way would be a negative 7 note away perfect fourth. The fourth not really helping me anymore, but it still gives me the flavor. If I go 6 forward, 12 minus 6 would be negative 6 backwards, right in the middle of the block. That would be a 6 note away diminished fifth. Therefore, the inverse would be a negative 6 note away diminished fifth, or possibly augmented fourth, if we don't get messy with that one. If I go forward 7 notes, then 12 minus 7 means I can go backwards or counterclockwise to get to the same spot 5 steps. So forward would be a 7 note away perfect fifth. Therefore, the perfect fifth could also go backwards, negative 5 note away perfect fifth. The fifth no longer helps me think about scale degrees that way, but because it should be a negative scale degree distance-wise, but it still gives me the general flavor of if I played those two at the same time. If I go forward 8 steps clockwise, I could go counterclockwise 4 steps, negative 4 to get to the same spot. Forward would be an 8 note away minor sixth. Therefore, backwards is going to be a negative 4 note away minor 6. So the minor 6 could go forward 8 or back 4. The 6 only makes sense going forward, but still allows you the flavor when going backwards. If I go 9 notes forward, 12 minus 9 means I can go negative 3 steps counterclockwise. Going forward would be a 9 note away major 6. So therefore, I'm also going to say going backwards would be a negative 3 note away major 6. So the 6, again, only makes sense going forward, but still gives you the flavor going backwards. 10 note away forward would be 12 minus 10 or negative 2 steps back. So going forward, I would call it a 10 note away minor 7. Going backwards, therefore, is a negative 2 note away minor 7. Minor 7 could be going forward 10 or backwards 2. When going backwards, the 7 doesn't tell me negative scale degrees, but it still gives me the flavor because I kind of get an idea of what a minor 7 has a feel like. And then we have a 11 note away forward would be 12 minus 11. I can go counterclockwise 1 step. So going forward, it would be an 11 note away major 7, and therefore I can also go negative 1 major 7. The 7, once again, not giving me any scale degree distance information going negative, but still gives me the general flavor. So So next time we'll go over what I think would be a better way to do it, which would be our modal ranges and distance terms, which can easily go backwards and forwards in a way that, of course, makes sense. And even if you don't want to use these terms, I recommend looking at it because, again, these are subtle concepts that a lot of people, like, they don't really know. Like, if you knew these concepts inside and out, your progress would be so much faster. I really think that, people are lacking progress because of the inaccurate names, which detour people from thinking about distance properly, which leads particularly to guitarists thinking only in shape. They just drop interval counting altogether. They don't know the distance. You can do it that way, but you're losing a big tool that can be really helpful.